Today's Daf Yomi is Chagigah, Daf Beis. We're going to start Maseches Chagigah. And the same way we start this Masechta, may Hashem give us the strength to start many Masechtos together. Hakol Chayavim B'Re'iyah, everybody is obligated in Re'iyah. B'Chukas between Rashi and Tosfos. What does this mean? Rashi says this refers to the mitzvah of the pilgrimage that you have to make on the three festivals. As it states, Kol Zechor Chash Etzrichim Lisraos Ba'azara B'Regel. You need to be seen in the courtyard. That's what Rashi says. Hakol Chayavim B'Re'iyah. Everybody has to do the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. Whereas Tosfos says, no, Tosfos says, it can't be, because the mission refers to karbanos, refers to sacrifices, the cost of the sacrifices. So therefore Tosfos says, this refers to specifically a korban, a sacrificial offering, which is called the olas re'iyah, the pilgrimage offering. That's what everybody's obligated, but it's not referring specifically to the pilgrimage. So everybody is obligated in the re'iyah. We'll go with Rashi's explanation. Everybody is obligated to go make a pilgrimage to the temple 3 times a year. Chutz micheresh shota v'katan, with the exception of a cheresh. Cheresh is somebody who is deaf and mute, as we'll see the Talmud will discuss. And somebody who is shota. Shota is somebody who is not of sound mind. And a minor, katan, is a minor. Who else is going to be exempt? Tumtum, a person who is, tumtum is somebody who their private parts are covered up by a skin, a membrane, and so therefore it's not clear if they're male or female. And an androgynous. Androgynous is somebody who has the private parts of male and female. Such a person is also going to be exempt. Vinashim, and also a woman. A woman is going to be exempt. Va'avadim. The Talmud has the concept of slavery. Obviously, to us today, there's nothing more abhorrent and revolting and repulsive. But in the time of the Talmud, they had this concept of Canaanite slaves. So a slave that was not yet freed is also going to be exempt from the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. A slave is considered to be partially Jewish. They have certain laws that they have to do, but this law that they don't have to do. Chagigah, this is somebody who is lame, that they have trouble walking. Masuma, a person who's blind. So we have this Sefer Chidushim here of Rabbi Yitzchak Landau. He talks about the idea of a lot of these concepts are metaphorical or symbolic, that we have to be whole, complete in body and soul. And that's why it's so important for a Torah scholar to exercise and to be in shape and to work to try to get their body in shape, also to be at one with Hashem. In addition to that, we have a chola and a zaken, somebody who's sick and somebody who's elderly, also are exempt from the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. Somebody who is not able to walk from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount with his feet is going to be exempt, because it's called Shalosh Regalim, the three festivals. But it doesn't say Shalosh Pamim 3 times a year. It says Regalim, and Regal is the same word as foot. So from here, the rabbis say you have to be able to walk. That's what the mission is saying, in order to be obligated. And now we said, what is a minor? We said a minor is exempt, but we know that a minor, parents have another obligation with a minor, that even though there's not a biblical obligation, the sages placed upon the father and the mother the obligation lechancho b'mitzvot, to educate him with commandments. And so therefore the sages are obligated to educate such a person. The sages say the parents are obligated to educate such a person. And so at what age do we say the child's not exempt because we have to educate him and bring him? So this is a dispute. The first position is Ezu Katan Kol She'enu Yachol or Koval K'tefav Shel Aviv Ve'alot Yerushalayim Har Bayis. Divrei Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai says it's anybody who is not able to go on his father's shoulders and go from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount. Meaning to say, if the child is not yet able to sit on his father's shoulders for that distance of time, not a 5-minute walk, then he's going to be exempt. Then he's not going to have to go. But if he can go on the shoulders, he's obligated. But whereas Beisol says, Kol she'enu yachol achos biyado shel aviv u'aros m'Yerushalayim har bayis. Beisol says differently. Beisol says anybody who's not able to hold his father's hand and to go up from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount. You have to be able to hold his father's hand, as it states. So it's a little bit older. Shenemar, as it states, Shalosh Regalim, 3 Regalim, and Regal refers to foot, so you need to be able to walk. And what's the value? What's the minimum price of this offering that you have to bring? Remember, that's how Tosfos interprets our Mishnah, saying everybody is obligated to bring what's called an Olas Re'iyah, a pilgrimage offering. In addition to the Olas Re'iyah, there's another type of offering which you have to bring on the festival, which is called a Chagigah. Shalmei Chagigah. What's the difference in a Karban Shlamim and a Karban Olah? Karban Olah is entirely burnt on the altar. Karban Shlamim is an offering where it's in this week's portion. Rashi says in this week's parsha, the altar gets some, meaning God gets some, and some is burnt, some is eaten by the Kohen, and some is eaten by the owner. So it brings peace to everybody. Everybody gets to partake in it. So what's the minimum value of it? Of the Oas Re'iyah? Shammai says Hariyah Shtei Kesef. It's 2 meos of Kesef. Rashi says it's 1/3 of a dinar, and the Chagigah is half that amount. The offering you get to eat is worth half of the one that's entirely burnt. That's Mea Kesef. Whereas Beisil says it's the opposite. He says the Re'iyah is Mea Kesef. The one that's burnt, the Oah is one Kesef, whereas the Chagigah is Shtei Kesef. The Chagigah is 2 Kesef. So it says the Gemara. We said in our Mishnah, everybody's obligated in the pilgrimage, and then it lists all the exceptions. So when it said, why does it say everybody? It must be adding a category of people we might have thought were excluded. So who is Hakol Asuye Mai? What's it coming to include when it says everybody is obligated? So it's coming to include somebody who's half slave and half free. Such a person who's half slave and half free, such a person is still obligated is obligated in the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. So that's what it's saying. Hakol chayav, and even if you're half slave and half free, you're obligated. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second. Ravina, we're going to see that Ravina says, and we're going to get to this on Daf Dalet. Ravina's of the position that if somebody is half slave and half free, he's exempt from the pilgrimage. So according to Ravina, our Mishnah can't be that coming to include somebody who's half slave, half free. How can you be a half slave, half free? So the simplest way to understand it is if there's 2 people who own the slave in partnership, and then one of them releases their share and frees him. So the other one still owns it. So Ravina says, So Ravina says somebody who's half slave and half free is exempt from the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. Well, if that's the case, according to Ravina, Hakol, when it says that everybody's obligated, what does it come to include? Hakol Asuye Mai. What's it coming to include? This person is exempt. So who is obligated in the midst of the pilgrimage? Who else? Who we might have thought was exempt? Who else is obligated? So the Gemara says, well, Ravina would have to say, Ravina would have to say that we're referring to somebody, and when it says everybody's obligated, it's even a person who on day 1 was not healthy enough, he was lame, and the holiday was 7 days, Pesach 7-day holiday, and he became healed from his illness on day 2. So we might have thought, well, since he was unable to go on day 1, he's going to be exempt. So we're saying no, he has to do. Since he was healthy enough on day 2, he's obligated to do it. You don't get the grandfather clause. So the Gemara says to include a person who was lame on day 1 and then became healed by day 2. The Gemara says, wait. This is actually going to be a dispute, which we're going to get to in Daf Tes, that we say that you have 7 days to make it up. If you miss the sacrifice the first day, you have the festival to make it up. But what's the concept? When you're making it up, is each day its own mitzvah, or you're making up the first mitzvah, the first day? So if you say, what's the difference, how you analyze the conceptual difference between the opinions? Well, if you say the first day is its own mitzvah, the first day is a mitzvah and everything else just making up for it, well, then if you're not healthy on day 1, you're going to be exempt. But if you say each day is its own mitzvah, then if you miss in day 1, but you're healthy by day 2, then of course you still have to, you're still going to have to bring it. So according to the one who says that each one is its own mitzvah, it makes sense why if you're not healthy on day 1, but you're healthy on day 2, why you have to still bring the offering. But according to the one who says it's the mitzvah is day one and we're just making up for day one, then our Mishnah, then you wouldn't be obligated. So that's what our Gemara is going to say now. So makes sense to say that if you're lame on day one and then you're healed, that you have to still, that the word hakol is coming to include such a person, and he's obligated in the mitzvah of making a pilgrimage because each one is its own holiday. Each one is its own obligation. According to the one who says, no, everybody's making it up for the first day, then if you miss the first day because you're sick, then you're exempt. So hakol asuye mai. So what is the word hakol coming to include? What's it coming to include? So the Gemara says, asuye suma ba'achas me'inav. It's coming to include somebody who is blind in one of his eyes. Somebody who's blind in one of his eyes is not obligated in the midst of the pilgrimage. That is what the Gemara that's what the Gemara says according to Ravina. Must be somebody who's blind in one eye, that you have to be able to see God with two eyes. So this is also, we have to understand this literally on a literal legal level, but also symbolically. If a person is not seeing, that they're only partially seeing God, they're not seeing the world, their vision is somehow stunted, they're going to be exempt. In this position, our mission, which says such a person who's blind in one eye is exempt from the midst of the pilgrimage, is not like the following source. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Yochanan ben Dahavai Omer, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda. Yochanan ben Dahavai taught in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, Suma ba'achas me'enav, a person who's blind in one eye, Pater min ha're'iyah, is going to be exempt from the mitzvah of re'iyah, from the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. As it states, Yera'eh calls a churcha, but it says Yera'eh, but we read it, it could also be read as Yer'eh. So we see it means Yer'eh, Yera'eh, meaning to say, Kederach shabal erot, kach bal erot. There's two ways to really, a lot of disputes, how do you understand this? But you can say, the same way he comes to see, so too he shall be seen. Meaning to say, only somebody, we're being seen by God with full vision. So too, only if you can see in full vision are you going to be obligated in the mitzvah. So too, when you appear before God in the temple, it has to do with two eyes. So far we've seen that our Mishnah, therefore, has to tell us that somebody who can only see with one eye is still going to be included in the mitzvah of the pilgrimage, because there's a different source that says that such a person is not included. Or alternatively, let's go back to the first answer. That what is our Mishnah coming to include? It's coming to include a person who's a half slave, half free. Well, what would Ravina say? Ravina says a half slave, a half free is exempt. So the Gemara is going to say actually there was a intellectual history to this law, and at one point a person who was half slave and half free was exempt. And that's what Ravina was referring to. But then later on, our Mishnah reversed that earlier source and said that that person is now obligated. And so that's what we're going to say. Kam Mishnah Rishona, Kam Mishnah Achrona. When Ravina said such a person is exempt, he was referring to the earlier teaching. But our Mishnah is the later teaching. The Tanan, because we learned, what do you do with such a person who's a half slave and half free? So the Mishnah says, okay, so let's look at it purely from the perspective of money. Well, you can solve this problem easily by just saying, let him work for his master for one day. He'll get Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and he'll work Monday, Wednesday, Friday for himself. And Shabbos, nobody's allowed to work, so that's no problem. And so divide up the asset. It shouldn't be an issue. That's what Beis Hillel says. Beis Hillel says, no problem. Somebody's half slave, half free, just divide up the money, and it's not an issue. Whereas Amru and Beis Shammai says, this is not just a monetary question. It's not just a monetary question. We're on the top of 2b. This is much deeper. How is this person going to live if he's half slave and half free? We have a category of people who are slaves, and they have certain rights to live as a slave. They have people who they can marry, ways they can live. We have also people who are free, and they have people who they can marry and how they can live. But a person who's nishtaher, he's in between. This is not going to be a blessing for him. That's what Beis Shammai says. This person is without a way forward. He doesn't have a path forward. Why? He's not allowed to marry a shifcha, a Canaanite slave. He's not allowed to marry her because he's Jewish, and also he's partially Jewish. And to marry a Bas Thorin, but to marry a Jewish woman, he can't do because he's also a half Canaanite slave. So Bas Thorin ain't no Yachol. So Bas Thorin ain't no Yachol. So okay, so he's not able to get married. So the Gemara says, well, Livatel, let's tell him not to get married. Let's just tell this person, you know what? You're one of those people who can't get married. No, that's not acceptable. Talmud says we're not going to accept that. It says Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai. Ironically, this week's parasha is about the garments of the Kohanim. Garments of the Kohanim, and we're remembering of that story in I think it's Shabbos Chaf Aleph, where somebody was davening. Somebody heard them reading the Torah. And he hears them reading about the beautiful garments of the Kohanim, and he says, I want to convert me on the condition that I could wear the garments of the Kohanim. And Beis Shammai throws him out, and Beis Hillel says that you okay, I'll convert you, and he converts him. And then this man is studying, and he sees that a non-Kohen who wears it is put to death. So he says even David HaMelech, Yisrael can't wear it. So there, Beis Hillel was accepting, and he allows the person. He converts the person even before he was all fixed, even before he was able to dress, even before he realized that he couldn't wear the garments of the Kohanim. But here in this case, Beis Shammai is the one who says, no, we can't leave this person in this solution. So Beis Hillel was always like, we'll push it off for another day, we'll figure it out. But Beis Shammai says, no, I want the answer right now. What's this person's answer going to be? And he says, the world was created. The world was created for this person to be fruitful and multiplied, for him to have a path forward in life. And he's not going to have a path. As it says, the world was created. Well, Rashi says, God didn't create the world to be without settlement. The world needs to be settled. We can't have even on a theoretical level a concept of somebody who's not allowed to get married. And so therefore, Beis Shammai says, no, what do we do? Beis Shammai says, because of Tikkun Olam, we can't allow the world to be in a state of disrepair. We're kofinas rabba. We force the master, and we make him a free man. We force the master to free the slave. And we write him a contract for the half the money that he owes him. Beis Hillel reversed himself. He rules like Beis Shammai, and he says that this person is obligated in the mitzvah of pilgrimage, even if he hasn't yet been freed. That's the chiddush of our Mishnah. Even if he has not yet been freed, he's still obligated in the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. Tosfos asks the question. Tosfos says, wait 1 second. So the slave, let's say the slave's name is Shimon. So the slave needs to be freed, but Reuven has a prohibition of freeing a slave. So we're going to make Reuven do a sin so that Shimon can do a mitzvah. But that goes against the concept of what we learn elsewhere in the Talmud, where we don't say that one person should sin so that the other person should benefit. We generally don't say that. So how come in this case we're able to say it? So there's two things that Tosfos points out. First of all, this is a small sin, and this is a great mitzvah. To be able to live your life is a great mitzvah. The world was created for settlement, for creativity. But also, secondly, the second concept is that in the case where we say, the case from Shabbos and Erev and the other tractates where we say you're not allowed to sin, but another person can benefit, that's where the first person had done something wrong to begin with. Like, for example, he put something in the oven and you could take it out where it's only a rabbinic violation, but he shouldn't have put it in the first place. He was a posheya. He did something wrong. Here, this slave, this half slave, has done nothing wrong. And so therefore, under those circumstances, you can do something wrong to help him so he's able to do something great. So that's a very important concept from Tosfos. Okay, so now we continue with the Mishnah, the discussion on the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that everybody is obligated, exception of a minor, but a katan is a minor. Shota is somebody who is not of sound mind. And then there's the cheresh. The cheresh is, generally speaking, somebody who's deaf. So somebody who's deaf is not obligated in the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. Well, how could this be? Katani. So our Gemara says, our Mishnah says, Cheresh, when it refers to the category of a person known as deaf, Dumya deshota v'katan. This is referring to the same type of person as a shota, somebody who's not of sound mind, is insane, and a katan, and also a minor. Ma shota the katan lo avnei. Just like the shota and the katan, these are people who are not of sound mind. They're not of agency. So it must be talking about a deaf person. This is a deaf person who's not of sound mind. The Kamash Malan, and it's teaching us the Kamash Malan, and that's what it's teaching us that this is the Kiddush. It's teaching us like the following mission that we learned. When the rabbis refer to this category of a deaf man, they were talking about she'eno shomea ve'eno medaber. They're referring to a person who is not only deaf, but he's also unable to speak. He's deaf and mute. He can't hear and he can't speak. Such a person is the one who the rabbis categorize as a deaf person, who would be exempt, so to speak, from the mitzvah of pilgrimage. Ha-medaber ve'eno shomea, or shomea ve'eno medaber, chayev. But if a person is able to speak, but he can't hear, or can hear but can't speak, he would be indeed actually liable to the mitzvah of the, he would be liable in mitzvahs, and in this case, he'd be liable in the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. And Tanino lahadetana rabbanim. Indeed, the rabbis taught this. Amadaber ve'eno shomea. One who can speak but not hear, zeu cheresh. That's called cheresh, deaf. Shomea ve'eno medaber, someone who could hear but not speak, zeu ilaim. That's called ilaim, or mute. But both of those categories, if you can hear but not speak, or speak but not hear, you're like a pikeach, meaning to say you're like a regular person. When do we say this category of somebody who's exempt from commandments? That's if somebody can't do either one, can't hear or speak. But if you can do one or the other, then we know that you have intelligence. In those days, they used to think that somebody who couldn't hear or couldn't speak, they had no way of communicating with him. So they mistakenly thought that that person was not of sound mind and didn't have agency. And Gemara is going to tell us, as we keep learning, that they realized there was once this case where the person wasn't able to communicate, and they thought he was dumb. And then they realized, wow, he knows more than us. He's so smart, and they put him in the front row. So, but at that point, they think if a person can't hear or speak, they thought he was not of sound mind. The Tanino the Tana Rabbanan. The rabbis taught us, one who can speak but not hear, zeu cheresh. That's the deaf. Shomea ve'eno medaber, one who can hear but not speak, zeu ilaim. That's the mute. Both of these categories, they're like wise people for all their words. And the Talmud says, how do we know that? That one who speaks but can't hear is deaf, and one who hears but can't speak is ilaim. He says, let's cite the verse from Psalms. It says, "Vanika cheresh v'lo eshma." I'm like a deaf person, I can't hear. That means cheresh means somebody who can't hear. Uke ilaim, and I'm like a person who's ilaim, mute, or yiftach piv, cannot open his mouth. So we see ilaim means can't open his mouth. We buy the same alternative answer. Like people say his words were taken, but ishtakel milule has like the vowels in it of ilaim, of being mute. Not the vowels, the letters of ilaim, being mute. So we had said that medaber ve'eno shomea, shomeina ve'eno medaber is chayav. That somebody, the Bryce had said that if somebody is able to speak but can't hear, or could hear but can't speak, he's going to be liable. He's still liable in the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Vatanya, we learned in the Bryce, medaber ve'eno shomea, shomeina ve'eno medaber, that if you can speak but not hear, or hear but not speak, pater, you're exempt. So are you exempt or are you liable? We have these two contradictory sources. One source says that you're liable, but now we just cite another source. It says that if you have only one of these qualities, speaking but not hearing, or hearing but not speaking, you're going to be liable. You're going to be exempt. So which is it? So the Gemara explains as follows. So Amar Ravina comes in along, and Ravina says, our mission is actually defective. We have to amend the source. The source needs to be fixed. This is what we need to say. There's two mitzvahs. There's the mitzvah of the pilgrimage, and there's also the mitzvah of simcha, which Rashi is going to tell us the mitzvah of rejoicing in the festival. by eating this sacrificial food. So kol chayavim b're'iyah u'b'simcha. Everybody's obligated in this pilgrimage, saying our Mishnah. Chutz micheresh ha'medaber beino shomea beino medaber shepater min ha're'iyah. So a person who can hear but not speak, or speak but not hear, is going to be exempt from the mitzvah of the pilgrimage. Even though they're exempt from the mitzvah of the pilgrimage, they're still obligated to rejoice in the festival. Whereas one who cannot hear and speak, and also a minor and the insane, or that one who are not of sound mind, they're pater af min simcha. They're going to be exempt also from the mitzvah of rejoicing. Because such people are exempt from all the commandments of the Torah. And indeed, we have a source that says this exact same thing. We have a source that says this exact same thing. Everybody's obligated in the pilgrimage and in the rejoicing, except somebody who hears, but one who can hear but not speak, or speak but not hear, they're exempt from the pilgrimage. On the top of 3a, even though they're exempt from the pilgrimage, they're obligated in the mitzvah of rejoicing. Rashi says, to rejoice in the festival. And one who cannot do either one, and the insane and the minor, they're also going to be exempt from the simcha, from rejoicing, whole mitzvos, because they're exempt from all the commandments that are listed in the Torah. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address the questions.